I want to introduce to you Dr. Ralph West. Many of you already know him. If you've heard him preach, then you have been blessed. I had the privilege of being the chairman of the BWA Congress in South Africa in 2015. We were only able to invite one preacher from each of the continents and one teacher from each of the continents. And so we asked Joel Gregory if he would come as the preacher, and we asked Dr. Ralph West if he would come as our teacher. And the two of them were used by God in an incredible way in that Congress where thousands of people from around the world came together to celebrate our oneness in Christ. Dr. West started the Church Without Walls. They didn't have an unusual name, but that's how they started, the Church Without Walls. And I think he started with maybe 30 people there in Houston. He had preached his first sermon in Houston when he was 16 years old. And so now, after he'd been to seminary in different places, he started this church with about 30 members. And now they minister to thousands of families in Houston. He's a professor at Truett Seminary as well. And I think, Jeremy, isn't he doing some work at Duke or teaching at Duke? And so Dr. West is one of the most sought-after preachers and teachers in North America, and we're honored to have him. One time I was traveling through Houston. I was at the airport, and I struck up a conversation with someone who lived in Houston. And I said, I think I was with Texas Baptist then, and I said, have you ever heard of Ed Young? He said, Ed Young, no, I've never heard of Ed Young. I said, well, he's the pastor of Second Baptist in Houston. And no, I never heard of Second Baptist in Houston. And so then I said, well, have you ever heard of Ralph West? Pass? Everybody in Houston knows Pass. Dr. West, yeah, we know who he is. And he just got that kind of impact, not only on Houston, but he really speaks to my heart, and he speaks to my conscience, and he speaks to my sensibility when I hear him speak from his worldview and from his perspective. And so we're extremely honored today to have Dr. Ralph West. I wish it had not been for the COVID restrictions, he could have been here with us, but we're just thrilled that he and his staff are joining us by video. So this time, we will listen to Dr. West. Unfortunately, we won't be able to ask him questions because we weren't able to set that up. But if you'll get questions to us, then we'll be glad to send it to his staff, and hopefully he'll be able to respond to it. So let's listen to Dr. Ralph West.
Let me begin first by just expressing how appreciative I am to have been invited to the Speak Freedom Conference and to have been asked to participate. Randall Everett is one of my favorite people on the planet. I was listening to him introduce me, and I was smiling, and I'm going to have to get off the Zoom and ask the Lord to forgive me for enjoying all his kind words. But I really wish I could be with you today, and I look forward to our coming together very soon. I have about 2 or 3 or 4 questions that have been written down, and this might be the framework that I use to talk about leadership and my leadership. And so these would be probably anticipated questions. So with that said, let me get going because I know we have limited time, and I want to use the time effectively and wisely. One of the questions that was asking me is to tell me about the burden that led you to start the Church Without Walls. I had pastored Greater Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church in the Independent Heights community. And I've been there for 4 years. And the church and I, we came to an impasse over many things. And leadership was the primary thing. I wanted to go forward. I think they wanted to stand still. I'm not making myself out of some champion, but there were great opportunities. In 1987, everything that was happening in Houston in terms of growth and expansion was taking place in Southwest Houston. I was in North Houston and close to Northwest Houston. And that's where the new growth was going to take place. And I felt like if we could get to Northwest Houston, we'll have a good opportunity to reach, hundreds, thousands of unchurched people. Now, I'm able to articulate that now in hindsight, but at the time, I would not have said it that way. And so we came to an impasse about purchasing land, expanding facilities, and it really boiled down to leadership. So let me begin that something that became a burden for me in terms of expanding our church, though it was a burden, I literally did not know what steps to take to make that happen. I came out of a strong preaching tradition, and it had been passed to me that if you could preach, then you could lead. I later learned it didn't take long that that's not true. And I came out of a very healthy church where the pastor was the voice. What the pastor said, that was it. And I thought that's the way church was everywhere. I later found out that's not true. And so the burden that really started affecting me is that at Greater Mount Zion, we saw the church grow numerically, but not very much spiritually. I came out again, not just a strong church, but a strong evangelically driven church. My pastor was, in those days, what you'd call a soul winner. We had what you call SWAT, Soul Winners Action Team, where he trained us to go out door to door on Saturdays, knocking, taking the gospel, sharing our faith. And so though we did this at Greater Mount Zion and we started experiencing growth, that's where the problem came. And so in one church meeting that was held, the leadership of the church simply said, we didn't call you here to bring all these other people to our church. And so that's where the real impasse was. That's 4 years narrowed down, to a slit. And so I moved away from that church and planted a church. I didn't split the church. I planted the church. I became friends with Glenn Ray and J.K. Minton was at Lazy Brook Baptist Church. They befriended me. I knew them. We were in the same community, and I planted Brook Hollow Baptist Church at the Brook Hollow Marriott at Highway 290 and 610. I had no idea that the church, the area was growing like that. None whatsoever. One of my friends who I was in seminary with, Dad was a big realtor and developer, let me come up to his office, gave me a vision of what the community would look like, and I knew I was in the right place. And so soul winning, if I can use that as a term today, soul winning became a real burden for me in planning the church. The name The Church Without Walls, Richard, was derived out of a series of sermons from the book of Acts, where I made this comment about what Jesus did with the church would happen outside. He met outside, he healed outside, he baptized outside. Then I made this comment, when a man put his hands on him, they wanted to lock him up inside. They put him in a tomb, but he didn't like being inside. And so on an early Sunday morning, he got out, broke out, he's outside, And Marcia Henderson Mitchell in my church walked up to me and she said, that sounds like a church without walls. And that's when we took the tag, The Church Without Walls, and inverted it over Brook Hollow Baptist Church. And then over the years, we started living out what does that mean? As you can just imagine when people would hear the metaphor, church without walls, where are the walls? You don't have walls. And then there was one group that thought that the church without walls meant, anything goes and that kind of thing. But it became a missional statement that we would reach people and we would reach all kinds of people, and the doors of our church would be open to as Jesus opened himself up to all people who would follow him. So I guess you could say evangelism was a big burden for the planning and the development of our church. Along those lines, another question that was asked to me was why excellence is required for effective leadership. And I can answer that question now, but as I think back at that moment, leadership for me meant one thing: preaching a sermon and influencing everything that you did through that preaching. That's how my pastor led the church, and that's how I felt like you're supposed to lead the church. If I preached it, then that's what we're supposed to do. But I later found out that leadership meant a lot more than that, and the excellence of leadership involved, believability, credibility, modeling a particular leadership where people would be attracted to it, that they would see the credibility in the leader, they would follow that leader. That actually came to me in 1990. Joe Ratliff pastors, he still pastors, Brentwood Baptist Church. And he invited me to go with he and his staff, and I took one of my staff members to the Crystal Cathedral. Robert Schuller had at that time, it was the 25th annual Effective Leadership Conference, Successful Church Leadership Conference. I remember that was the word he used there. And this is at the height of C. Peter Wagner and others and the church growth movement. And so I went there and I listened to these different people tell their stories about their churches and what they were doing. And that's the year I heard Bill Hybels for the first time. And then they had their Bishop Charles Blake, who just stepped down and retired as the presiding bishop of the Church of God in Christ. He pastored West Angeles. And then they had a guy there named John Maxwell. And this is when Maxwell was the pastor of Wesleyan Skyline in San Diego. And he was very energetic, but he focused on leadership. And I said, man, this is what leadership is. And so you had Bruce Larson and you had Juan Carlos Ortiz. And so everything was focused around leadership. And I discovered that though all of these people preached leadership, they also developed people to carry out what leadership looked like. Ephesians 4 was big on every one of their agendas. So when I got back home, I was all excited about what God could do in church and through leadership. And so I jumped in 10 feet of water leadership, which leads me to the third question that was asked to me: who were some of your leadership heroes? Well, my pastor would be one. He would certainly be one, Pastor A. Lewis Patterson, Pastor O.C. Johnson, and Pastor Floyd Harris. I was not a church hopper. These were the different churches I attended when I was at home and then away in school. Pastor Patterson was the solid preacher of exposition. He's the one that introduced that term to me, expositional preaching. My pastor, who I was baptized, licensed, ordained under O.C. Johnson, was not a trained man, but he was a very effective preacher. In fact, some of you probably remember the old name Herschel Ford. Pastor Johnson had all of his simple sermons, and he would rework those sermons. I learned later that that would have been one of the ways that he educated himself, by studying some of the topical sermons from Ford, and it shaped his preaching. Floyd Harris was the least. He was my college pastor. He was the least of the preachers, but he was the most effective pastor, which was a kind of dichotomy for me, because remember, I thought that if you were a good preacher, that meant that you were a great leader. Well, I don't like to say this too much because I said this publicly and got myself in trouble with some people that used to go to church with me when I was in college, but he was not a strong preacher at all. But he was an amazing pastor. He loved people, and he really taught me what it meant to love people. I can remember him celebrating the joys of families, but I also saw him when he grieved with people in our church. Now, there are other names, of course, along the way that became mentors of leadership for me. I would say that the John Maxwell at Wesley Skyline seriously affected my understanding of leadership, as well as a few other people along the way. So that leads me then to another question that was asking me, well, what are some of the resources that you consult as you continue to develop as a leader? Because I always want to continue to learn and grow and develop. And so I wrote down just a couple of names of people that I turn to when I want to continue in leadership. Well, one is Jesus. I always view him as a great leader. And I really do. How he led his disciples. I mean, what a staff to have to work with. And yet they blow it, but after they're empowered and equipped to do ministry, they really shine after his resurrection and power of the Holy Spirit. Peter finally finds his stability, and James and John, and on and on. Moses becomes a great example. My favorite one is one of the great lessons I learned from Moses as a leader is when he wanted to do everything himself. This goes back again, being trained in a particular way of observing the leaders, being the preacher. And bottom line is, I do everything. And Jethro comes along and says, look, find people who you can equip, entrust, empower, trust them to make good decisions. And then the heavy areas of life, that's where you get involved in. So Jesus, the scriptures, maybe my textbook in the Bible for leadership might be 1 Corinthians, because on every page for 16 chapters, there's some church problem and how it needs to be addressed. So Jesus becomes a great example. Moses gives me a wonderful lesson of leadership and developing staff. And then my text for the Bible, within the Bible, would be 1 Corinthians and probably Nehemiah also. But outside of that would be biographies, reading the life of people, people that I may agree with and some that I don't agree with. And then I remember reading just a couple of names. Greenleaf would be one of them, Robert Greenleaf, who's kind of the leader in that area. John Carter would be one of them. Maxwell Northhouse would be one. Just names I've come across. I think in leadership, you also have to find people that not only lead effectively, but people that are akin to you. What I mean by akin to people that you identify with, people that you really relate to. That leads to another question that was asked of what have been some of my greatest challenges and opportunities as I led the congregation. That's a pretty tough question for me to answer because so many changes. So I think today, I would say the new changes that come, challenges I have now, is the one that we're doing at this very moment. How do you do effective church, be effective pastor, effective preacher, teacher, where almost everything you do is virtual, electronic. And that's become a big challenge. And I think it's going to be a challenge that's before us for a long time, even after we return to in-person church. I believe that Sunday mornings are going to be enormous days for churches. I believe that even smaller, rural country lane churches, I think they're going to have their biggest days coming on Sunday. It's going to be Easter more than just once a year. At the same time, I think that the challenge is going to be that people are going to make the decision, let's say Monday through Saturday may look different. Bible studies, virtual Bible studies may be a new way that people really get engaged, meetings that we have, things like that, you know. So on one hand, it is a challenge, but the other is it's an opportunity because you get a chance to reach people that you otherwise wouldn't reach. I have a lot of people, like probably many of you, whose members have relocated out of the country to do work. And now, and they have been, but even more so now, they log on and they really feel, because everybody else is virtual, they really feel that back in church. So that's one of the challenges, just church. In terms of community, how to keep the church engaged in the community. You know, when Jesus makes this comment about being the salt of the earth, I really take that serious, that culture collapse and there's so much moral and ethical decay that God calls us to be the preservative, to enter into the world, to sustain it. I really believe that. I think that the church has an enormous opportunity to do some great work in the world. It's one of the things why, and I really mean it, this is my commercial, that I'm enjoying 21 Wilberforce and Randall so much, and anything that I can do to participate, you know, I just have to count me in and do it. The last question, because I want to stay within this time I've kind of gone over. Let me just make it, and it goes in line with what I was saying a minute ago. How can the church in America lead out as we face injustice of racism and other pressing justice issues? I think that one of the ways that the church can lead is to try her best to be true to the teachings of the scriptures, that we seek to do justice, and that we walk and be humble, and we love God. I really believe that we can do things like that. You know, you have creation and you have fall. You have redemption, and one day we'll have consummation. And in the midst of that, God is moving the world back to what He originally intended her to be. And that's our role, to participate with God in the area to make things right. That's the first thing. On a very practical level, one of the things that we can do is what we're doing now, is that the more people see the church, we talk about racial equality and justice, just see the church come together in oneness, in events like this, in fellowship. I believe that's what people start saying, that's what the church really looks like. I spoke at the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis. And I'll close with this. And I made the comment in the sermon about this very question, what can we do? And I said, one place we could start is that we could just be nice to each other. And people started laughing, and then they started clapping. And then people were standing up, because it's true. We've seen how indecent humanity can be over the last weeks. We've seen how Asian Americans have been abused. We have seen how children have been exploited. We have watched killings in our streets. And you sit down and say, that's not who we are. We're better than that. We need redemption and we need reconciliation. We need people who are just justice driven, who will say, I'm going to do my part to make things right. And I think that's something. Well, I'm going to stop there. I've gone long enough. Thank you, Randall. I don't know if I answered anything in terms of how I do leadership. I'm doing the best I can looking at myself on this screen, okay? But I tell you, I look forward to our journey together with Jesus in the days, months, and years to come.
I kind of realized how important parental blessing was for Drayton. When Drayton wanted to buy the Astros, he wanted to get permission from his parents. And so he went to his dad and asked, I like to buy a baseball team. I mean, most of us do, right? I mean, most of us would love to buy a baseball team. So he wanted to buy a baseball team, and his dad was okay with it. Then he went to his mother, and his mother said, no. Well, she said, unless you promise to not play on Sunday. And so she'd bless him. And he said, I don't have any control over that. I can't do that. We'll have to play on Sunday. And then finally she said, well, go ask the preacher. And so, try to be a good son, he went to the preacher, and preachers, we'll agree to anything for a free ticket to a baseball game. Absolutely, Drayton, buy that thing, buy it and let me sit by you, when we go to so he went to his preacher, got the blessings from his preacher, came back and told his mother. The preacher said yes. And she said, was it the young one or the real one or something like that? He hadn't gotten the blessing from the real preacher. It was from that young one that had come there. So still being influential. He's Drayton McLane the second, and some of us get to go to church with Drayton McLane the third and the fourth, and appreciate their family business and how God is using him not only in business, but how God is using their business to impact people like we just mentioned earlier and feeding them during the pandemic. Drayton, would you prefer to stand here and then just come and stand here and hold this, and then after that, then we'll be hearing from Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Randall, and it's an honor to be here today. And you all are the real one carrying the ministry, so it's a real pleasure to be here today. The story he was telling was that my father was 91 years old and my mother was 90 years old, and my father and my mother had raised my two older sisters and myself. We went to Sunday school and Sunday morning church. On Sunday night, we went, anybody remember BYPU, Baptist Young People Training Union? We went to training union on Sunday night. You remember those initials? And then we went to church on Sunday night and Wednesday night. And I knew she would have a problem. So I talked to my dad, and he said, I think it's a good idea, but go talk to your mother. So I went to talk to my mother, and she said, do they play on Sunday? And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, well, can you just not play on Sunday? And I said, well, I don't think that'll work in Major League Baseball. So we talked about it a little while, and our pastor, Ed Stewart, had just retired, and we loved him. He was a great pastor at First Baptist Temple for 20 years. Had just retired, and she said, well, why don't you go talk to Dr. Stewart? I said, yes, ma'am. So I talked to him, and he said, well, what's your mission? And I said, we want to buy a franchise and do two things. We want to be the champion. We want to be the best. And then we want to use the popularity and the respect they have to stand for noble purposes and to really get the players and get involved in the community and do a lot of things. And so he said, well, let me think about it. And he called me back in a couple of days, and he said, well, if you'll do that, and I'm going to hold you responsible, I think it's a good idea. Couldn't wait to go see my mother. So I went to see my mother, 90 years old, and I said, Mother, Dr. Stewart thought it'd be a good idea. She said, well, you have a new pastor. Why don't you go see him too? So she wasn't going to give up on just one pastor. So she wanted two pastors to see that. Well, thank you for asking me to come, and Wilberforce, and what we're all trying to learn, how to be better human beings personally, how to communicate our Christian faith to other people and lift others up. And one of my favorite subjects in the world is leadership. Why do about 3% in our society, you can go all over the world, it's about the same, about 3% get things done. Others have good lives, poor lives, in between somewhere. How does that 3% get it done? And that's who you are, and we're all trying to get better. We got to improve. And Dr. West, that's what I think I got from his message. We got to keep going. Boy, this is a fast changing society that we live in today. I think two thoughts. We think of leadership, getting things done, is management. Well, management's running things today, is running this meeting today. Leadership is coming up with this concept. I certainly didn't know Wilberforce before you to memorize it. I think you had to tell me 2 or 3 times what it was. But this was leadership, to use him and what he tried to get done in the early 1800s. Leadership is having ideas and concepts and trying to get big ideas done. So that's what we need to do as human beings. How do we lead? In business, I learned this a long time ago, was the 3 C's for leadership. Number 1, a great leader is curious. Are we curious? Or do we just stay in our own little environment and stay close? Or we look on our computer or our phone? So be curious about everything. We got to get out of our office. We got to get out of our home. We got to get out of our church and go out and see things. The second one is creativity, thinking differently. And Dr. West really talked about thinking creatively and different ideas, and I love the name of his church, and doing things in a different way. We're so conventional now, and we just hang on to the past. Caring. Do we really care about human beings? We get awful interested in ourselves, our programs, our ideas. Do we genuinely care about others, and do we listen to them? Communications. That's what ministers do. That's what great leaders do, is communicate. We've got to get better as communicators, be able to present our ideas in a better way, and to convince others. The last one is courageous. Do we quit easily? We got to be courageous. We got to stand for something. Back a number of years ago, I have 2 grown sons today, but when they were, one of them was 6 and the other one was 10, my wife and I went to Kenya, and we were going out and to see and to live out. We had some guides, and they were going to take us out, and we were going to live out for 7 days. The first day when we got out of our tent, he had 2 big Land Rovers there that we were going to ride in. And he said, I need to point out something to you. Said, we as human beings are the slowest thing out here. Said, there is not an animal out here as slow as we are. And he said, you think you can climb a tree? Said, all these animals can climb trees faster than you can. They can run faster than you can. They can swim faster than you can. Said, if you get separated from the Land Rover, you only have one chance. And he said that your only chance is to stand perfectly still and look that wild animal right in its eyes. He said, it's not a real good chance, but it's the only one you got. And I thought of that. As a leader, do we want to run? Remember, he said, we're the slowest thing out here. So they can get us and take care of us. The hardest part of life, Dr. West talked about it, Randall's talked about it, is change. Oh, we resist that in every way. I challenge people I work with. I challenge my children. I challenge myself. Don't challenge my wife. Look at your routine in the morning. Write down for the first 30 minutes you're up. Write down what order you do it in. Would you do that for me? Whatever. Brushing your teeth, whatever you do, write it down. The next day, change it all up. It's really, really hard. We want to change the world. We want to change ourselves. In 1972, I went to a grocery industry meeting in Chicago at the Palmer House. If you've ever been there, a big, very famous hotel in Chicago. And Gene Hoffman was the president of the Kroger Company at that time, the largest supermarket chain in America. And he said something that changed my life. And I think about it every morning when I get up. And his comment was, you'll never become what you want to be by remaining as you are. Can I say that again? You'll never become what you want to be. We have lofty dreams, big ideas, but we're stuck in a rut. We want to change other people, but we're not willing to change. He said, you'll never become what you want to be by remaining as you are. Change is painful, but leaders change. Can I introduce you to 3 people that I had the pleasure of knowing that changed the world, totally changed the world? And you think that they came from great places? All 3 of them came from the same area, Northwest Arkansas. Anybody ever been back into the Ozark Mountains? But I'd like to introduce you to three of them. Of the three, one of them has a college degree. The first one is Sam Walton, Bentonville, Arkansas. When I first started going to Bentonville and calling on Walmart, Bentonville in the 1970s was a town of 4,000. Today it's over 60,000 people. But the real important thing, Walmart, started by Sam Walton, David Gleiss, is only the largest corporation in the history of the world. Isn't that amazing? They have 1.8 million employees, bigger than the entire American military. Their computer system is bigger than the entire American computer system. They're doing business in 29 countries all over the world. Last year, they did $587 billion in sales. No one's half their size. Started by one man in a small town, Bentonville, Arkansas, in northwest Arkansas. Second town I'd like to take you to is Rogers, Arkansas, 12 miles away from Bentonville. It's a small town. At that time was about 6,000. The name of the person was J.B. Hunt. Anybody ever see trucks going down the road to say J.B. Hunt on them? You see these big containers on container railroad cars that are going through where they have 100 cars, and most of the containers say J.B. Hunt. He invented intermodal travel for moving product around the world, not only in the United States, but around the world. Never went to college. Built the largest transportation company in the history of the world. Go the other direction 12 miles and you go to Springdale, Arkansas. Anybody ever heard of Tyson? It was started by Don Tyson. Didn't go to college either. His father had a very, very small hatchery. He said, I want to grow chickens and sell them to the public. You know where his big breakthrough was? He invented the chicken nugget sandwich that McDonald's started, and now you can get it in all kinds. Tyson is the largest chicken processor in the world. You think Christianity is going? They're in over 200 countries in the world. Don't stop there. They're also the largest beef processor in the world. And you don't stop there. They're the largest poultry processor in the world. They got plants everywhere, all over the world, all three areas of meat. Three people, Bentonville, Rogers, Springdale, three men changed the world. Of the three, they weren't particularly close to each other. They respected. I was around the three of them. Each just pioneered on his own what people can do if they want to change the world. Had a business for a number of years that was involved in technology. We did technology for the Department of Defense, McLane Advanced Technology. And I got to know a number of military people, two interesting ones I met. One of them was an individual I met that was from West Virginia, and he really did some interesting things, and his name was Joe Lopez. Joe Lopez grew up in poverty in West Virginia. As soon as he got out of high school, he joined the Navy. I said, when I got to know him, I said, Joe, why would a person that grew up in West Virginia, there's not any ocean anywhere around there, join the Navy? And he said, to get the heck out of West Virginia. He was in the military 37 years. He went in without any advanced education. He went in as an enlisted man. 37 years later, he retired as a 4-star admiral. Rare that has ever happened, to start as an enlisted man and retire as a 4-star admiral. His personality, he was a fine Christian, he was a great communicator, and he knew how to inspire people. Joe Lopez. One other I'd like to mention to you is Tom Swartz. Tom Swartz grew up in Minneapolis. His father was a Lutheran minister. When he was going to be a junior in high school, he was a good athlete. And he said when he was a junior in high school, a guidance counselor said, Tom, where do you plan to go to college? And he said, college? I don't think that's something I'm thinking about. And she tried to inspire him to, and she said, with your father being a minister, you probably don't have the money to go yourself. why don't we try to get you in one of the military academies? And he said, where are they? And she said, West Point. And he said, what's West Point? He was an athlete. So anyway, they applied his junior year. Before the end of the year, he got a letter back from West Point. They said, we have been reviewing your case. We admire you wanting to become an Army officer, go to West Point, but you academics don't qualify you to be entered into West Point. And Tom said, yippee. The next year, as a senior in high school, he was a great athlete. Anybody remember the Look magazine? And they had the Look All-American. In November, the next year when he was a senior, he made the Look All-American football team. Said about 3 weeks later, he got a letter from West Point and said, we have been re-reviewing your credentials, and we think you'd be a great, great student for us. He said, I don't have any idea why I wanted to go to West Point. And he went there. Tom graduated 4 years later. He was they ranked the class when they graduate. He was in the bottom 20% of his class. I remember him saying there were 567 in his graduating class. When his class, or the members of his class, finished their military career, Tom stayed in 41 years, moved 37 times all over the world. There were only 2 in his class of 567 that made a 4-star general. Tom was one of the 2, bottom 20% of his class. He was also captain of the football team. Tom had this magnetic personality, the ability to inspire people and to really talk to people. If we're going to be good leaders, we got to get out there. We got to mix it with them, talk to them, and that's what Tom was. So change, I inspire you as you really get forward with change. We talk to Walmart. It's fun to go to a Walmart store and see everything they have there, or to order online and have them either send it to you or you go by and pick it up. That's moving forward. How many of you remember Kodak? Remember Kodak? Remember when you used to go in a store and they had the Kodak film, and it would be from here to the wall of 500 different kinds of yellow boxes of Kodak film. Everybody all over the world had a Kodak camera and Kodak film. Where's Kodak today? Bankrupt, out of business. Zoom, gone. Where is Xerox today? Remember how impressed you were with the first copiers? Thought that was going to change the world. Where's Xerox today? Totally out of business. Gone. You remember when the flip phone came out? Remember where it had the lid that folded up and you could put it in your pocket? I thought that was the neatest thing in the world. And I thought there will never be something better than this flip phone. It was made by Motorola. Where's Motorola today? Out of business, bankrupt. They didn't change. They thought they had the best phone for the next 75 years. And lo and behold, here came old Apple and the iPhone. They weren't prepared. So if we're going to get anywhere in life, we got to change. Did I mention you'll never become what you want to be by remaining as you are? So how do we get there? We got to set a plan. And the most important part of the plan, in my view, is to write down your values. I do that. Put them in my pocket. In our company today, our McLane Group value, which is a family holding company, it is respect, integrity, high standards and teamwork, and high Christian principles. I put that in my pocket. So if somebody asks me to invest in something or a business opportunity or something else, or Randall shows up, I look to see, does it fit these values we have here? How many good people have you seen in your career that were really, really great people, but they got off course somewhere along the way? Politicians, business leaders, ministers, people in general. They get tempted, they head in the wrong direction sometimes. So I would inspire you to write down your values. Then do a business plan. What do you want to become? And if you look at these that we talked about, they reinvented things. We can't just duplicate what somebody else is doing. If we're a church, we can't just be another church. We've got to have value. I got intrigued when Randall came back by in Wilberforce. So I looked up like all the rest. You just pull it up on your phone. I've asked a number of people. I was surprised. A number of people told me that already knew about it. Wilberforce. Here's somebody who changed the world. So write down your values. Write down a plan. What you want to accomplish. I've never seen this young man that he didn't have a big idea. Dr. Cook just talked to you a while ago. I've never known him. I know when he came here, and this building wasn't here, and about 90% of this university was not here. It didn't have the academic excellence that it has today, and people weren't coming from all over the United States to go to school here. They are now. He had a vision, he had integrity, and he inspired people to come here. And I remember one other that he didn't mention to you, that it had a great debt load, and I think they had a real struggle for the first 2 or 3 years for him to get them out of that tight spot they had in debt. But he had value, he had a business plan, he had great integrity, and he wanted to really communicate. So get a plan. All of us want to be highly successful. But my view and what I've tried to do in business is when I start, and even we started a number of new business, start small. You don't have to start with something great big. And Dr. West, didn't he say he started with less than 30 people attending his church? So we want to make a big impact, and we want to make a big go at it. Start small and get it successful and get the momentum going. One of the last advices I would give to you that's been powerful for me is get mentors. Get people to really tell you. We get so set in our ways, we get so comfortable who we are, and we really are not changing, that my father introduced me to that concept, and that has made a huge influence in my life. I had several rules for a mentor. A mentor cannot be a family member. Anybody related to my family in any way, or anyone related to the businesses that I was in. Because they're going to tell you what you want to hear. They want to make you feel good. You need to get a mentor that really tells you how it is. The second rule that was easy for me, get somebody a whole lot smarter than you are. Because they can really unload on you. You build self-confidence. And I've had a series of mentors that really change me personally, change my direction in business, and they'll really, really give you ideas and thoughts. One kind of interesting, I had a mentor, his name was Mike O'Connor, lived in Chicago. He was an intellectual. He said, Drayton, I've watched you, and you're too narrow. He said, I want you to start once a month to have lunch with a person that you really don't like. I looked at him like he's crazy. He said, if you'll look at us, we like to be around people that we're comfortable with, humorous with, have fun with, or their ideas agree with us. He said, nothing wrong with that. But he said, you get so narrow and you get prejudice. He said, try this, and you do it for 4 different months, and then you give me a call. But he said, have lunch with a person you really are uncomfortable with or you don't particularly enjoy. You learn compassion, you get some really good ideas, and you get generally a better appreciation of that person. So can I give you that challenge? That we, take detours. We get too comfortable with the same group. So we've got to get past that group and to move forward as we have opportunities in life and expand the group of people I cherish. My father taught me in our business, he said, every person that comes by here that wants to talk to you, take time to talk to them. We have no rules. We talk to everybody. Anybody calls, even I answer Randall's call. Or he answers mine. We get too narrow. We restrict things. We got to get broad-based. And I bet Dr. West would do that too. So can I challenge you as you move forward and you get change in your life, look forward to being with people that help you better understand what you need to achieve. The last idea that I learned, what were each of you doing the first week in June in 1958? None of you were born. Were you born, Randall? No, you weren't. In 1958, I was graduating from Michigan State University with an MBA program. And the dean of the Graduate School of Business, his name was Dr. Kenneth Wilson. He was the most provocative person I'd ever been around. And there were 72 of us in a 2-year program to get an MBA. And he called us into a room like this a couple of days before graduation. And he said, your parents and your families and the teachers here, we're very proud of you. But he said, I'm not sure we've really taught you anything that's going to make a big difference in your life. And that's pretty discouraging. After 2 years of study and having all of these tests and all of these studies that you had to do. And he said, I'm not sure we've really taught you anything that's going to make a big difference. But he said, I'd like to give you 4 ideas that can totally change your life. This is what he said to our group of 72 in 1958. So can I share them with you right quick? He said, the first thing you do in life, dare to dream. It's free. Dare to dream. It's free. When we were there in 1959, 57 and 58, computers were just coming out. He said, we're going to rely on computers to do all this for us. And he said, you got the best computer in the world right up here. Use it. And he said, there's nothing wrong of having a big idea up here and think about it and dream. Dare to dream, it's free. The second one, he said, operate out of your imagination, not your memory. He said the problem with most people is what they get tripped up about and isn't in their memory is their mistake. He said our mind gets clogged with our mistake. In 1952, I was in Yo High School in Cameron, Texas, and I was a sophomore in high school, and I could still remember standing in the hall one day talking to the prettiest girl in class. Her name was Carolyn Russell, and I asked her to go to the movies. And you know what she said? No. I can still remember that, and that was in 1952. This is his point. He said, we get our mind clogged up with our mistakes. Forget them. Use that mind for what you have. The third one, he said, in everything you do in life, seek adversity. The lines are shorter. What do we do in life? I do. When I went to Baylor and they had a section of math or English lit and they had 4 different teachers, what did I do? I got with my buddies and which was the easiest? Anybody else do that? Gary Cook didn't do that, I'm sure. We try to take the shortcut, but he said, if you'll think of where everybody else is going, just go the different direction. Life will be richer. The fourth one and the last one is, he said, I want you to visualize you're in Africa, and there are 2 big, tall peaks of mountains, and there's a swinging cable bridge between the 2 peaks. He said, I want you all to become an elephant, and I'm going to illustrate why. He said, I want you to look at those two tall peaks, that swinging cable bridge. And he said, a flea and an elephant went across that cable bridge. And when the flea and the elephant went across, it bounced up and down violently as they went across. Said when they got to the other side, the flea said to the elephant, we shook things up, didn't we? He said, pick out the elephants in life. There's an elephant right over here, and Gary Cook's another one. Will you do that? Thank you.
I'm privileged to introduce to you our son. Most places in Texas, he has to introduce me because God's given him a large platform. Sheila and I are very proud of our son, Jeremy, and I'm so glad now that I didn't kill him when he was in high school. So it's God is using him in a great way, and his wife Amy and their kids. We're especially grateful for our grandchildren. But just a little bit, rather than giving a biographical background about him, I knew God called me to be a preacher. I can tell you how God called me, using Ephesians 4 when he called me to be a preacher. Jeremy is just as called, and he can tell you his story about how God called him to serve the poor. And this is a part of who he's always been. He was about, 6 or 7, and Sheila and I were telling this story last night. We were on vacation. We were down in Marble Falls at Bluebonnet Cafe. Have you eaten there? We were eating there. A lady was sitting over at a table, and she just had some crackers and some water. And so we knew she was probably a homeless person. And I told the waitress, just go get her some food, get her a meal, feed her. It wasn't that I was compassionate. It was just that I could enjoy my meal a lot better, if I wasn't bugged by her. And so just go feed this lady. So they brought her some food. Well, after it's over, we were on vacation. After it's over, she said, would you give me a ride? I'm thinking, okay, we bought you a meal. We're not adopting you, and so I was kind of aggravated about that. But, I want to be a good influence on her family. So I said, where do you want to go? So she got in her car. We gave her a ride. And then when she got out, she said, could I borrow some money? Like we're going to get it back. She didn't want a handout. She wanted to borrow some money. And I just lost it. I said, lady, we're glad to buy you dinner. Happy to give you a ride, but that's it. That's all we can do. Basically leave us alone. We're on vacation. Jeremy was about 6 or 7. He's in the back seat. He reached over the seat. I don't remember how much it was, but he said, here's $7.35. That's all I got, but you can have it. I was so mad at him. I felt this big, but that's who he is. That's who he is. He'd come home from college and have two shirts and 2 pair of pants, and he would have given his clothes away, while I was in college. We'd be eating. We'd go out to eat, and he'd eat half his food, and we'd think, well, and he always had all his food at home, and my food, and the neighbor's food, and the dog's food, and, why would he only eat half? And he will have seen a homeless person. And so he'd take out half of it and give it to a homeless person on his way out. It's just who he is. It's how God has made him, and that's why God is using him effectively in his ministry with those who are hungry and those who are experiencing poverty. So glad to have Jeremy with us. Jeremy, if you just come and stand here, would that be okay? And share selectively.
It's for me, I was in conversation with a friend of mine recently, and he and his wife both have PhDs, and one of his son is in class with one of my middle son, Sam, and they were both doing very well in school, and the teacher was really commending them on how well they were doing in school. And they go to a public school with about 90% of the children in the school district are on the free and reduced lunch program. And my friend turned to me and he said, our kids are just doing what they should do. They've grown up around education. They've been exposed to education this whole time. What they're doing really isn't that remarkable, which could seem harsh. He didn't say it in front of his child. But I feel like in many respects, when you think about leadership, I've had mentors like my father my whole life. So why wouldn't I, be in a leadership role? And when people ask me, where did you learn leadership? That's the first place I go to. When they ask me, where did you learn to bail yourself out of jail? That's also the first place I went to as well. So, in fact, Ross Sawyer is here and pastor and was my youth minister. And I mentioned earlier that I take credit for Ross's ministry in local prisons because he used to visit me a lot when I was in high school, and so in the local jail, and that's where he got his start in prison ministry. But seriously, I'm grateful to be here. Here are a few thoughts that I have. First of all, the first one is proximity. And so if you want to engage a social issue, if you want to lead in a social capacity, you have to have proximity. Brian Stevenson, the author of Just Mercy, says that you can't solve a social problem from a distance, that you have to be immersed in that reality. Congressman John Lewis talked about when he was leading the Students for Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, that he and the organizers in the civil rights movement would live and dwell where they worked. And he called it incarnational organizing, that you live and dwell among the people just as Jesus did among us. Well, about 15 years ago, I was having one of those moments where it's like, how in the world did I get here? I was sitting in front of a coffee shop that I had opened on the west side of San Antonio, a very low-income neighborhood of about 150,000 residents, and it had just been broken into. So it was about 2 a.m. I was sitting in front. The doors had been smashed in by a gang who had broken in and stolen all of our computers. The police had called me earlier that evening, and they called and they said, "Are you Jeremy Everett?" And I was like, oh no, not this again. But I wasn't in trouble this time. But they called and they said, "Are you Jeremy Everett?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "Your coffee shop has been broken into." And so I told my wife, Amy, I said, I've got to go. And so I grabbed the clothes that I had next to the bed and I put them on and I made my way down just a few blocks away to the coffee shop where I was working. And sure enough, when I got there, there were 6 cop cars, and the police cars had responded very quickly to the crime because this was one of the places where they would come and drink coffee with the community. When I went in and I assessed the damage in the coffee shop, I saw that they had ripped all of the computers out of the wall. They tried to escape with the cash register and just had made a mess. When they kicked in the doors, they'd kicked in glass panes and glass was everywhere. And the police, when the police responded, actually caught 2 of the gang members. And I was furious. I was furious because those computers were the only place that people could access computers during that time in the early 2000s. And so I walked over to the police car and I saw the 2 gang members and I just yelled at them. I was like, "These are your computers. You could use these computers anytime that you wanted to." And they just peered back at me trying to intimidate me. And it worked. I can still remember them looking back at me through the police car. Well, fortunately, there was a housing project just behind the actual first housing project in the country. The Alzon Apache Courts was constructed right behind where the coffee shop was, and the gang members had an apartment complex an apartment that it was kind of their stash house, and so the area neighbors had seen them after the sirens had gone off. The neighbors had seen them run into that stash house with the computers and other things that they'd taken from the coffee shop. And they'd actually called the police and told them where they were. And so while I was there assessing the damage of the situation, the police said, "We got a call. We think we know where the computers have been taken." And they all took off to get the computers. They came back and they'd actually found them all. And so they helped me bring them inside, and there were a couple of teenage boys that were hanging out way too late that night, and I brought them inside to help me get the computer set up. And then I turned to the police officer. I said, "Is there any way that you can keep a police car here in front of the coffee shop during the night, because the doors are kicked in? There's no way that I can possibly repair them, and before we open up for business tomorrow morning." And they said, "No, we've already expended a lot of resources on this. We got to go somewhere else." So I was sitting there in front of the coffee shop, wondering, how in the world did I get here? How am I on the west side of San Antonio at 2 a.m., sitting in front of two doors that have been kicked in by gang members, stealing our computers out of this little community center, this little coffee shop that we've created? Well, about that time, I was getting nervous. And so I called Amy and I told her, I said, "Listen, I'm not going to be able to come home. I'm going to have to stay. I'm going to have to spend the night in front of these doors." But I began to get nervous because I was wondering, the gang members hadn't all been caught. And I was wondering if they were going to come back by. And as I was thinking about that, I looked up and I saw a group of people kind of emerge around a street corner about a block away. It was dark, so I couldn't really make them out, but I could see just kind of a group almost coming like a mob towards the coffee shop. I was pretty scared. And as they began to kind of hit the streetlights, I realized that these were the regulars from our shop. And they were people that had heard about what had happened, and they were coming to see if I was okay and to check on the coffee shop that they'd helped construct several years before. When they got there, they assessed the situation with me, and they immediately, grabbed brooms. The men left and went to retrieve tools and plywood so that we could fix the doors. And within an hour, we had the shop back to normal, with the exception of two glass doors being fixed. So I was able to go home. Well, the next morning I woke up, I made my way down to the coffee shop. And when I was sitting in the coffee shop, I was sitting with my staff, and we were reminiscing what had happened the night before. And the glass company had come, and they had repaired our glass doors, and they were fixed. And as we were sitting there conversing, kind of at the reality of the anxiety that had come with being broken into, the leader of the gang walked in during broad daylight. He walked in with his girlfriend following behind, and a couple of his fellow gang members. And they didn't look at us. They just looked to assess the damage in the coffee shop, and they realized that everything had been restored. It looked just like it did before the break-in. And I could tell that he was very angry. And so, not being the smart guy that I am, I was in the bottom 20% Drayton, so I could resonate with that part of your story. But I said, "Sir, can I help you?" And he didn't respond. And so I said it louder. "Sir, can I help you?" And he still didn't respond. Finally, I yelled again, "Sir, can I help you?" And he didn't respond, but he turned around and walked out the door, and his girlfriend and the other gang members followed. And as he was walking down the street, I decided I would follow him. And so I walked out in the street, and I yelled as loud as I could, "Sir, can I help you?" Well, when that happened, it was almost like one of those old Western movies, like where there's going to be a shootout in the middle of the street, and everybody seemed to kind of walk back to the edges of the street, kind of looking back to see what was going to happen. The man turned around, and he looked at me in the face, and he took off his jacket, and he handed it to his pregnant girlfriend. And it looked like we were about to fight. Now, I was smart enough to know I was not going to win this fight. And so I stepped towards him, but I put my hands in my pockets, and I said, "Sir, can I help you?" And he looked at me up and down, probably, similar to that wild animal. I knew I couldn't outrun him. I knew I wasn't stronger than he was. But I looked at him in the eyes, and I said, "Sir, can I help you?" And he said, "Nah, man." And he grabbed his jacket, and he turned around, and he left. When I went back to the coffee shop, my staff was sitting there with their eyes just wide open. And they said, one of my coworkers said, in Spanish, basically, you idiot. And he's like, what are you doing? And I said, I didn't want him to think that he was going to be able to walk in here and be met with cowardice. And I wanted him to know the same love and strength that you all had shown me when my family had moved to the neighborhood. And I wanted him to know that he was going to be met with sheer stupidity, evidently, by me following him down the street. But as we sat there and we talked, we were very nervous because our staff was worried because many of them lived in the housing projects where the gang members resided. And so we determined in conversation with my bosses that maybe we should close the coffee shop for a while, and that these folks that live next door to the gang should go stay with relatives across town, because the threat of retaliation was very real, and the fact that many of them had called the police on the gang members, that's just not something that you do. Well, I parked my car right in front of where these gang members lived every day, so they knew exactly what we drove, and we just lived a few blocks away. And so my family and I, we switched cars with a friend across town so that no one would at least recognize our car in front of our house. It was one of those situations like, how in the world did I get here? Well, after a long weekend, we came back and we met as a team at the coffee shop, and I checked on everybody's health and well-being, and everybody was doing okay. And we were gripped by fear, but we decided that we wouldn't let fear win. We're going to put love to the test. And so we went to the neighborhood, and we wanted to throw a barbecue for the people in the community that responded to us, and for people that had come into that coffee shop for the previous year's ministry that became really a community center for them. And so we decided that we would invite everybody that we knew in the neighborhood, including the gang members, to invite to the cookout. Well, they came in droves, and just family after family came, and we ate and we spent time together. And the gang members decided that this wasn't for them. And so one of the gang members decided that because of the hospitality that he'd been shown by people that he'd hurt, decided he was going to leave the gang. And I remember sitting in the coffee shop 2 years later watching him talk to one of the little abuelitas next to him on the computers that he'd tried to steal years before, just getting to know her. He decided to leave. He decided to leave the gang, but the gang decided to leave the neighborhood because they knew that love was going to win over fear. Proximity is key. You can't solve a social problem when you're driving into the neighborhood from 9 to 5. You have to be immersed in people's reality on a daily basis. And when you do that, that's how you cultivate trust. Stephen Covey says that leadership moves at the speed of trust. And so if you're really wanting to transform your community, it's about being immersed with them, and it's about cultivating trust. Like Drayton said, it's about having a big vision. And when you have a big vision, people are going to think you're crazy. And you probably are. But it's sticking with it in anyway. And then collaboration. My dad mentioned a project that we did with one of Drayton's companies called McLane Global, with his son, Denton McLane, who leads that company. We had found when I was serving on a congressional commission, we were traveling around the country, and we identified that things that were working to address hunger in urban areas weren't translating to rural areas, especially for children. When children were getting out of school, they couldn't access summer meals because they lived too far away from any kind of a summer meal site. And programs like putting money on extra money on a SNAP card didn't work for them either because they didn't have grocery stores in their community. And so we, in partnership with USDA, decided that we would mail boxes of food to kids who lived in remote areas in East and West Texas, a small pilot that we launched with 20 different school districts in East and West Texas. We ended up serving about 500,000 meals in the first summer of that pilot. And so we went back to USDA, and USDA, at the behest of Senator Murkowski, asked us to move the program to Alaska and to New Mexico. That was our plan before the pandemic hit. But collaboration, we couldn't have done the initial program without having a food logistics partner. And so with their food logistics business, they were able to bring their best to bear. And with our team at the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty, we were able to bring research and people who knew how to address hunger and had been intimately involved with people because of their proximity to the problem. By bringing those two by bringing our two organizations together in partnership with USDA, we were able to accomplish more than we ever thought that we could. So when the pandemic hit and they called us and asked us to scale nationwide, literally within a few days, we were able to do so. So collaboration is key. The last thing I'll leave you with is commitment to the cause. I had an opportunity to meet Father Gustavo Gutierrez, the godfather of liberation theology, a Peruvian Catholic priest, about 20 years ago. I joke that he's only about 4.5 feet tall, and he stands he's like a Peruvian version of Yoda, and very wise. I'm pretty sure he's 350 years old. And so I asked him, I said, Father Gutierrez, how do you have solidarity with the poor? And he said, commit your life to their cause. And certainly, when you think about somebody like William Wilberforce, that is what he did. He committed his life to the cause of ending the British slave trade and accomplished that goal 3 days before he died. His whole career was building collaboration to end the British slave trade. But one of his biographers noted that that wasn't the most successful accomplishment that he had. That his most successful accomplishment was ending the very idea that slavery was even an acceptable form of commerce. Because until that point, throughout all human history, that was just how we did business. Well, I think today, the same challenge is before us. When we think about religious freedom, when we think about racial injustice, when we think about food insecurity and economic insecurity, when we think about these injustices, I believe that we are going to have a big vision. That like Wilberforce, we're going to have to decide that hunger and poverty are no longer acceptable forms of commerce, and we're going to have to envision a world without them. And if we do, then may Jesus say to us what he says to the sheep in Matthew 25, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father in heaven, inherit the kingdom prepared for you, for I was hungry, and you gave me food." Thank you.
Someone want to go to the mic? Russ?
Have propelled you to the to what you do well?
Great question. Again, those who may not have heard the first one, what were some key failures that they've experienced? Have you guys ever into failures?
Yeah.
Do y'all do that too?
That's right.
I specialize in that.
That's right.
Both of you will respond.
Yeah, I'll give one example. A handful of years ago, the state Health and Human Service Office contracted with us to rebuild how you create SNAP and WIC and Medicaid and Medicare access points. And we operate from the standpoint that no one organization or one sector can end hunger by themselves, that it's going to require us all working together. And so over a 4-year period, we recruited and trained 1,400 community-based access points for families to be able to sign up for those benefit programs. And those were at churches and nonprofit organizations. A lot of frontline organizations were helping these families do it. Had huge impact, put more than $2 billion in that time period of resources into low-income families' pockets in Texas. But we had a subcontractor, it was a well-meaning subcontractor, who vehemently disagreed with our governor around the Syrian refugee crisis. And so they spoke very publicly about their thoughts about the governor when that happened. And when the governor found out about that they were actually receiving state money, he essentially had the contract ended as soon as it could legally be ended. I think one of the things that I learned from that was, first of all, self-righteous indignation doesn't get you very far. What ended up happening for us is we ended up having to lay off 25 people, which was big for an organization our size. And I had to sit down with each individual and tell them that, they were no longer working with us. And that was something I don't want to have to do again. But it also, now we don't have those 1,400 community-based access points. And so I think one of the things that I learned from that, a whole bunch of things. One is that as an organization, we needed to be more diversified, that we needed to have more consistent resources coming in, that we needed to be cultivating those relationships on a political level and on a social level, even after we got a contract, that wasn't the be-all, end-all. That we needed to be a better manager and steward of those resources and making sure that we had more strategic alignment with the partners that we did collaborate with, so that we wouldn't find ourselves in that circumstance. But that was a situation that was one of those markers for us as an organization, that everybody that still works with us now remembers, and we don't want to live it again. But it's also informed the project that our organizations are working on right now, Meals to You, which is where we're mailing these boxes of food around the country. We knew that we launched that initiative with Secretary Perdue at USDA, and he was a Trump appointee. And we knew that, with the change to the Biden administration, that we couldn't take our project for granted, and that it was going to take us working hard in DC to continue to cultivate those relationships, increase buy-in, so that we could keep doing the good work that was established. So I think you just can't let down. You have to keep pushing. So
Good word.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for the question. I should have said that when it was my chance to talk. I'm a big one on making mistakes. You're really not being a leader if you're in your comfort zone and you're just cautious in everything you do. So I think in school, they teach us not to make a mistake. There is nothing wrong with making a mistake. And the question is, admit it when you see something's wrong and say, hey, that was my fault. And I sure learned a lot, and I'll never do that again. In McLane Company, we had a lot of employees and had a lot of executives. And I talked to them a great deal about making mistakes. Does that sound odd? You're really not being creative. And I told them there were 3 rules I had on making mistakes. Number one, if you make a mistake, the number one thing is you got to be sure whatever you do has got to represent honesty and integrity and high Christian principles, and it not be illegal. Number two, when you go out there, don't bet the company store on it. If you have $1,000, don't put more than, say, $300 on it. Number 3, if it blows up, be sure you're still alive. So number 1, if you hadn't violated any law, ethics, you're in great shape. You didn't bet the company store, you still got $700. And then number 3, you're still alive. It might have blown the hair off of you and blown your clothes off of you, but you're still good. You're still in great shape. But the real rich part of this, you've learned a lot. You'll say, boy, I can sure learn a lot, but I want to change it just this little bit, and I think it'll be successful. I don't think we encourage people enough to be risk takers.
That's certainly important. And leaders want to value risk takers. And you want to allow people to fail. I mean, if they fail all the time, get rid of them. But I mean, you still want them to take risk, of possibilities. And so I really appreciate that, doing autopsies on things that are working well, but also autopsies on things that don't work well. Learning from
to review what you learned.
Yeah. Very, very helpful. Great question, Ross. All right, some other wonderful questions. Brother Pinson.
So, Mr. McLane, you gave us a window into your decision-making process for buying the Astros. What are maybe some of the steps as you're evaluating decisions that you go through when you have a situation before you?
You asked first, have you ever made a mistake? And I could have said, you bet, I bought a Houston Astros. That was a high risk. and it met my criteria. We were going to do ethical things. We were going to use the star value of those players, as Jeremy talked about, to help other people have better lives, something to inspire. Take them out in the community and really go places. And then, it's a financial risk. Had to do it. I hate to tell you all this. I'd been to 3 major league games in my entire life, and I bought the Houston Astros. Now, I might be a little off guard here. I've been in a lot of different businesses, and I've been in a lot of charitable projects. Business is business. Logic is logic. And you need to assess, is this worth the risk or the rewards to it? And do I have a backup plan if it doesn't success, if it's not successful? So I really encourage you. That's so. Some of the best work I've ever done was when I was in the biggest mess in the world. You ever been in a mess?
I create them.
You bet you do.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at them sometimes. Some of the best work I've ever done. So I'll let Jeremy talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great observation. I'm thinking, why didn't I bring my notebook over here so that I could write some of those notes down? But yeah, I think evaluating capacity. So we had a church come to us recently who wanted to do who wanted to build a grocery store in South Dallas, and the grocery business is incredibly difficult.
Amen.
That's right.
Been in 57 years.
That's right. So what do you have, a 1% to 2% margin in most retail stores?
2%.
Yep. So the thought of, as a nonprofit organization or a church, building a grocery store and doing it successfully in an area that's considered a food desert is the deck is stacked against you. And so I think evaluating their capacity. So what's the church? What kind of resources do they have? Are they prepared to lose money if they're going to do this? Are they doing this as a ministry? Are they willing to Are they willing to partner? Are they willing to partner with pre-existing food companies, or are they open to working with other organizations that might be able to extend their capacity, or with the city? So I think it's evaluating that from the very beginning is what's being proposed a winnable issue, or are the organizations able to pull off what they're wanting to pull off? And that's on a case by case basis. And I think the more you do it and the more you miss, the better off you are probably the next time to be able to say yes to the right one.
I want to be sure to say at least one controversial thing here, but we churches, we love to give out food,
right?
And so I wonder which is the most appropriate response to a Matthew 25 kind of commitment. Taking a turkey on Thanksgiving to as many families as you can, or would it be better if we went door to door signing people up for SNAP food? If that way they could have their own money, they could go to local grocery stores, help the grocery stores. They also could feed their own children rather than having some church come to bring them a turkey. And so anyway, which is the greater outreach? And so that's something that you probably influenced me about the importance of that. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll say, for the SNAP program specifically, or what we used to call the food stamp program. The SNAP program, what we used to call the food stamp program, for every dollar that comes into your local community, it has $1.80 worth of economic stimulative effect. And so I joke with our economists on our team, I call it trickle up economics, and because you're investing in the lowest income people in your community, and that money trickles up to the owners of the company. Walmart reclaims about $20 billion in that program alone in their grocery stores around the country. And one of our partners at the National Grocers Association told us that program accounts for 1 in 10 of their jobs that they have in local grocery stores. So you're not only providing resources for food that can only be spent on food to your lowest income population in your community, but they are immediately reinvesting that money in local businesses. And that creates job opportunities for other people. And so when you think about, is it best to do a turkey? The turkey is great, and it can be a relational opportunity for you to be able to build relationships with people that you need to know in the community. But if you think about how do we move towards justice, well, that is certainly a more just way for somebody to be able to choose to be able to pick out their own food. And, this is my soapbox. So since I'm on it, I would say that, most families that are on that program are also employed. They're working. And so there's a misnomer. And I really think for people of faith, for us, Pharaoh said that the slaves in Egypt were, when he was talking about the Hebrew people, he called them lazy. He said they become lazy, so let's make them harvest their own wheat so that they can, make their own bricks. Well, or their own straw so they can make their own bricks. Well, we've been using that same tired old argument for thousands of years, calling the poor lazy as if that is the cause for their plight. And what we tell our researchers all the time is that you have to do a good job of identifying what that problem actually is, because if you misidentify the problem, your solutions are always going to be wrong. So if people are actually predominantly employed, they're just underemployed, and then these programs like SNAP can become work support programs. And so that it's important to understand the causes of the people that you're trying to serve and what they're dealing with before we get too prescriptive too quickly, I guess.
All right, wonderful advice. Trent, do you have a question from one of our online participants?
We do. We've got a few actually, but I like this one especially. Leaders often have to face opposition as they're leading and implementing a vision. So how do you find that you develop or build courage within yourself and those around you to face opposition in such a climate of fear?
Yeah. I think, I think everybody said adversity is going to come your way. I think it's expecting adversity and then just not stopping. And the people that I respect most in leadership, some are phenomenal public speakers and communicators. Some are amazing business leaders or great fundraisers. Some are in elected positions. Most are not, and especially these days. But they just don't quit. They don't quit. They feel called to address the issue that is before them, and they don't stop. Like Wilberforce, they commit their life to that cause. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you. Be careful. You can get too far out on your own. I've said to a lot of executives, if you go back to medieval times, king and queens lost their heads because they got way ahead of the people, self-serving. They lived a different life than everybody else. So as a leader, you can come up with good ideas. Remember I said, start small. You'll find out in a hurry how well that's being received. And failure is a part of being a risk taker, coming up with new ideas. So be careful. Try to sell your ideas to the groups of people that you're trying to get engaged with. See what their reaction is. You can't get out there by yourself. You need the people to be supportive, and you've got to see if what your idea is really worthwhile. I've charged off in some directions that I found out that wasn't really a good idea. So be careful. You stay close and be sure you've tested your idea out and you make sure it's sound and others understand. You make it too complicated and nobody has a clue what you're trying to do. So be sure it's something that people can accept and do this. I said Walmart was the largest corporation in the history of the world. What's now the second largest corporation in the history of the world? Amazon. How did they start? Did they start glorious? What did they start doing? They started selling books. Remember that? That was how they started. It was a very humble beginning, and the books clicked. Then they branched out in some other things, and it really didn't start going until they got into food. And I've been in the food business over 56 years, and I said, that'll never work. And look at it today. It has worked. But they started small. Start small, test your ideas, and improve it as you go. Don't be afraid to get into areas you don't totally know. That's where the person in Jeff Bezos, where did he come from? He had an MBA from Harvard, and he was an investment banker in New York, and he became a retailer. He didn't know anything about it. He just tested it and do it. Start small and find out the reaction to your ideas, and then how you adjust it and how you enhance it.
Well, what inspiration. Let's maybe one more. Yes. Robert, you got some sage advice here for all of us. Yeah.
This is for Drayton. Drayton, you told me one time that one day you're going to look back over your life and just check off all the things that you've done with your life. Do you have one project you're the most proud of that was more God-honoring, that you're so pleased that you have?
Well, the most important is I'm a Christian and a person of strong faith. The second is I've been married for 49 years, have 2 grown sons and 2 good daughter-in-laws. The only mistake there, one of them is a Red Raider and the other one's an Auburn Tiger. I'm trying to overlook those 2. But 2 great daughter-in-laws and 5 great grandsons. So that's what you're most proud of what you've done. That's the lasting value of what you really think about.